Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today to hear about how businesses can support natural climate solutions, in this case focusing on reforestation in Europe. My name is Tom Popple and I lead the design and development of climate programs for the European region and Natural Capital Partners. This webinar is popular. We've had a very good sign-up rate from companies from around the world and many different industries, so clearly this is a topic people want to hear about. The webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour and we'll leave around 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. You are all muted in listen-only mode, so please use the panel on the right-hand side of the screen to submit any questions and we'll go through them in the end. Forests represent one of the largest and most cost-effective climate solutions available today and are essential to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Through programs, businesses can support projects which protect, restore, and create forests around the world. Their programs enable them to take action on climate change, build resilience, and support communities in the supply chain and operations of their business, as well as engaging staff and customers through high-impact actions. The panel today will explore reforestation concepts and activities in Europe. We'll be joined by an esteemed panel of experts to share their insight and experience enabling leadership in Europe through natural climate solutions. Steve Pryor, co-founder of Forest Carbon.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Casper de Groot, an advisor at Stadbosfor here.
Good afternoon, thank you for having me.
Holly Beale, environmental sustainability leader in Microsoft Data Center Community and Development Team.
Hello, good afternoon.
And Kim Humak Hansen, head of sustainability at Thomas Cook Northern Europe.
Good afternoon and hello from Copenhagen.
Thank you all. So before we begin the main presentations, we'd like to run a quick audience poll. You should see it on the screen coming up next. So to what extent does your organization integrate natural climate solutions or NCS into your climate strategy? So please select one of the options there. So the first one is supporting NCS is a big part of our climate strategy. The second one is supporting NCS is part of our strategy, or NCS does not feature in our climate strategy. I'll just give you a minute to respond and then we can share the results. Fantastic. Okay, so we have a perfectly mixed and eclectic audience. So with 46%, almost half of you, where natural climate solutions are actually a big part of the strategy, and then a quarter there where it does not yet feature. So let's see if this webinar can stoke the fires of your interest in NCS. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So for over 20 years, Natural Capital Partners have been building natural climate solutions into climate action programs for businesses. In fact, we were originally founded as a company called Future Forests, and we are recognized global leaders in the design, development, and delivery of credible and impact-focused corporate climate programs. We harness the power of business to create a more sustainable world. Next slide. Our heritage in forestry extends to projects around the world, from Mexico to Madagascar, UK to Uganda, Ireland to Indonesia, and Canada to Cambodia, and everywhere in between. Sustainable forest creation and management provides more than just a carbon impact. Projects provide habitat to an immeasurable variety of flora and fauna, livelihoods to millions of families and communities, many of them indigenous communities, and ecosystem services that support every aspect of our environmental, economic, and social survival. Today, our clients have enabled the protection of more than 3 million hectares of forest and supported close to 850,000 people living locally. Next slide, please. We can categorize our forest programs into two approaches: protection and restoration of existing forests that are threatened and or degraded, and the creation of new forests in regions that were historically forested. There are three key drivers for business to be involved in these programs, although many exist beyond these three. Climate, so meeting objectives around carbon reduction and long-term carbon removals. Value chain, delivering measurable and tangible impact within communities and landscapes where businesses operate, and indeed where their customers may exist. And engagement, inspiring and informing employees and stakeholders about the action taken locally, and also enabling a tangible link to global climate programs. Next slide, please. So as we explore, businesses have different drivers for supporting forestry. These determine the approach taken for business to have credible claims. This 2x2 diagram on the screen helps us demonstrate the options available to business for making credible tree and carbon reduction claims. On the vertical axis, it shows increased claim to trees planted from client financing. And on the horizontal axis, it shows increased claim to reportable carbon reductions from businesses' financing programs. The first box at the bottom left is charitable giving. This is a donation to an organization that supports forestry with no direct result or outcome linked to the finance. They offer a very weak claim for trees and carbon, as ownership of the impact cannot be evidenced. It is a fantastic association for brands and they play a role in the program, but for the purpose of trees or carbon, it's not a strong claim. Next one, tree planting. So financing new tree planting where payment is made per tree or per area. There is a direct link of financing to trees, therefore a very strong claim for trees, but not necessarily a strong claim for carbon, as the project may not be associated with a credible carbon reporting methodology and ownership of the carbon reduction is not included, determined, or can be contestable. Double counting and tree survival are key risks to be aware of in this instance if businesses are following it. Next one, carbon credits. So financing existing tree planting activities where payment is made per ton of carbon dioxide removal. There is a very strong claim for carbon reduction, but a weak claim to trees, as finance is based on project output, which is carbon, and not necessarily on the input, which is trees planted, though a natural correlation exists. And finally, catalyst. So financing new tree planting activities where payment is made per ton of carbon dioxide removal, as well as trees planted. There's a very strong claim for trees planted and carbon reduction because finance is based on the expected project output, which is carbon reductions, by funding the input, which is planted trees. Carbon reductions can take more than 10 years to have significant carbon reductions to allow for the tree growth. Other considerations around reputation and risk that businesses should be aware of, but not covered here, are due diligence. Forestry projects differ from many other climate projects due to the longevity and large land occupation. So it's critical to work with proven partners in both the structure of your program and the delivery on the ground, to apply best-in-class standards and approaches to ensure credible claims, trees, carbon, or other, and planting the right trees. It sounds obvious, but many highly criticized forest projects have not taken this into consideration. Next slide, please. So why Europe? For business, it's about the previous drivers, locality to business, etc. Many customers are based within Europe and many business operations in Europe. But from a global perspective, it's crucial to recognize that Europe, like many developed and increasingly developing nations, have exploited their natural forest resources and deforested. When we think of deforestation, we often have an image of tropical rainforests like the Amazon or Congo or in Borneo. These are recent examples of widespread deforestation, but this trend occurred centuries before in Europe. The map here shows an aggregation of data to showcase 3 forest cover types: intact forest, often known as primary forest, in the dark green; current forest, that is trees that are standing but not primary forest, in the light green; and original forest cover, where forest once stood. So a driver for action in Europe could therefore be one of legacy, of restoring Europe's woodlands. Next slide, please. Over the last 20 years, we've been working to support reforestation projects across the UK and globally, with many support of major brands. Our partnerships have expanded over time, and we've been able to enable clients to take climate action closer to home through projects in 4 European countries, and with many more in the pipeline. In Ireland, through the initial support of Microsoft, we have supported the government in creating a newly endorsed native woodland financing mechanism, which enables easier access for businesses to support native woodland creation. And there were some big announcements coming in that market very soon as well. In Spain, through the support of Thomas Cook, rural communities are seeking climate-based regeneration of local environment and economy. Kim is going to talk more about that. In the Netherlands, again, through the support of Microsoft, we've enabled Stadbosbeheer here to expand its program of rehabilitating ash dieback forest, a disease that is spreading across Europe and into the UK and Ireland. And Casper will touch on that. In the UK, we continue to drive innovation with the support of Forest Carbon and Steve's team and identify new opportunities for businesses, including the development of a new code around peatlands, the Peatland Code. With the pending Article 6 updates in the Paris rulebook, the division between developing and developed world emissions exchange will change. Nationally generated emissions from businesses will have an increasing range of nationally based emission reduction options, including in Europe, with natural climate solutions taking center stage. Just as an aside and a theme that you will find throughout this webinar, my favorite tree is a rowan tree, just to close this segment. And the reason why rowan is my favorite, because in my newly adopted home in Ireland, through Celtic mythology, it's known as the tree of life and symbolizes courage, wisdom, and protection. And also, my nan used to have a rowan tree, and we used to squish the berries on the path when we were kids growing up. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'd now like to move over to the first presenter, which is Steve Pryor, who is co-founder at Forest Carbon. So Steve is one of the architects of the UK Woodland Carbon Code, and has been a member of its Technical Advisory Committee and a current member of the Code's Advisory Board. Steve has advised the government on the development of the peatland code and is a member of its Technical Advisory Board. And Steve's favourite tree is the silver birch. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I'll say the silver birch, just to give you that bit of background, is my favourite tree because they're very prevalent where we live here in the North Pennines, and although they are very pretty, they're also extremely tough in the sort of conditions they'll grow in. So I sort of like that combination. So next slide, please. I thought I'd sort of introduce us to get going there. My co-founder James and I, we founded Forest Carbon back in 2006 because we could see that trees were going to be vital in the UK's mission to address climate change. We knew that forest cover and planting rates in the UK were very low, and we felt that they would remain low without intervention or some form of intervention from the voluntary carbon market. We also knew, alongside carbon capture, which is mitigation there, that trees were also going to play a big part in adaptation, and they also offered significant co-benefits to society, and I'll touch on those a bit later. As Tom has mentioned, we were crucial to the creation of the Woodland Carbon Code, which is the government's quality assurance standard, both initially in terms of lobbying to get them to buy into creating the standard, and then also we supported its development. By the time it launched in 2011, we already had about 40 projects that we had completed, ready to certify. We're now the largest Woodland Carbon Code participant. I think we account for about 85% of all transactions via the code and 95% of all project verifications. We've also lately been helping the government develop a quality assurance standard for peatland restoration carbon projects, and we completed the first such project in 2017. Again, as Tom has mentioned, we were partners with Microsoft and Natural Capital Partners on the Irish Woodland Creation Programme, and we've continued to work in Ireland since then to develop more projects. And then finally, I've just put a list of partners we work with so far. Some of them we've worked with for many years, and that wasn't really put there as a kind of a show-off list. It was more a means of demonstrating that there are already significant businesses that believe in woodland creation as an important part of their climate change mitigation strategy. Next slide, please. So I've touched on forests being important, and I think it's something we all instinctively know. We know woodlands are good.
One second, if I can.
Sure.
There's a bit of crackling on the microphone. I just wonder if you could just move your microphone slightly away. I think that might resolve it.
Okay, sure thing.
Thank you.
Yep, so I think we all instinctively know that the woodlands are good, but I thought I'd just go through a few reasons here. First one is water-based. Flooding, first of all. Planted in the right place, trees will reduce downstream flooding. They do that by reducing peak flow, and they do that by intercepting rainfall in various ways before it reaches watercourses. In the same way, trees will also intercept runoff pollution, which helps keep rivers clean. And they'll reduce water temperature by shading, which again is good for aquatic habitat. I think it's also worth mentioning here that some of these benefits will begin accruing the minute the trees are planted and livestock is excluded. So you don't need to wait for forests to grow to get some of these benefits. And similarly is the case with biodiversity. Once you exclude livestock from an area, you get an immediate return of flora and fauna, excluding livestock or preventing or ceasing high intensity agriculture. The next one, economic benefits. We know that sustainable timber is going to be increasingly important to the UK. We currently import about 80% of our timber, and that makes us number 2 in the world in terms of importing. If you add to this the fact that only 33% of global timber consumption is sustainable, I think it's not hard to see that growing timber here reduces pressure on old growth forests elsewhere. I think about 40% of our projects have some sort of extractive element to them. When it comes to public benefits, there's plenty of evidence about the health and well-being impact of living near forests or being in forests. And of course, our projects also support employment, and that might be the ultimate social benefit of all. We think the voluntary carbon market here in the UK has the potential to support up to 10,000 jobs in the woodland, forestry and nursery sectors. I've left climate change to last. Obviously, that's the primary reason we're doing this, but I thought I'd demonstrate that the other benefits are significant too. The potential for carbon mitigation is huge, I think. A 2009 government report projected that increases in planting in the UK could mitigate up to 10% of our national carbon footprint, which I think is not inconsiderable. Next slide, please. So credibility is obviously vital to all of this. Businesses need to be able to be sure that the investments that they are making are credible, transparent, and those sorts of things. So we need quality assurance standards. Those standards should all adhere to a sort of global set of principles, and I'll run through those quickly here. The first one is additionality, and this is meaning that a project can demonstrate that it would not have proceeded without carbon funding. This is particularly important in the European context, where most forestry activity will be in receipt of some form of government funding in addition to carbon funding. Secondly, monitoring. Projects should be monitored and subject to ongoing recertification via the independent audit of the quality assurance standards. So again, it's important that the projects aren't planted and forgotten. They have to be monitored. Thirdly, conservatism is important. Obviously, carbon capture in a new woodland is by necessity a projection. The trees are small, haven't done much yet. So the projections need to be conservative and based on the best available science. And finally, somewhat obviously, projects need to be of a high quality. And in the UK, we sort of express that as planting the right trees in the right places for the right reasons. In the UK, the quality assurance is provided, as we've mentioned, by the Woodland Carbon Code. This is a standard developed, owned and operated by the UK government. If you know your ISOs, it's an ISO 14064-5 standard with all projects subject to independent audit. The carbon credits there are issued via the market registry, which you may be familiar with. That is the home of leading global carbon standards, including the Woodland Carbon Code. Outside of the UK, there's no carbon standard yet in Ireland. As Tom mentioned, there's the Woodland Environment Fund, which is more of a sponsorship standard at the moment, although I think there are discussions underway between the UK and Irish Forest Services to see if there could be some form of collaboration in the future on the carbon code. For our work with Natural Capital Partners and Microsoft, we use the rules and methodologies of the Woodland Carbon Code to develop those projects. Elsewhere in Europe, we have some standards operating in France, Spain, and the Netherlands, all operating slightly different to the code here, and all at varying stages of development. But I think what is clear is that to tackle climate change, intervention from businesses and individuals is going to be vital, and standards such as these are a really important intervention in giving those people and businesses the confidence in making an investment. Next slide, please. Finally, I just thought I'd touch on what the consequences of climate change are here in the UK and what businesses could achieve. We've got a climate change risk assessment developed by the government. It's pretty detailed in its projections for the consequences of climate change here. Included in that are around 3.5 million homes at risk of flooding, greater summer water shortages in some pretty big catchment areas, increased summer heat mortality, and more invasive pests and diseases. You can see so far the contribution of our partners in starting to address this. 158 woodlands planted so far, a sort of an evolving pipeline of more on the way. The big numbers, 10 million trees, 6,000 hectares, 2 million tons of CO2 capture underway. I think what's most interesting there, as well as the next point, which is that our partners supported 5.5% of all woodland creation in the UK between 2013 and 2018. So there's a clear indicator there of the size of the contribution business can make. So we might be sort of pleased with those numbers, but when you move on and look at the aspirations for the UK government, you can see that we are woefully short of where we need to be as a country. The Independent Committee for Climate Change recommends between 30,000 and 50,000 hectares of new planting per year, starting immediately. Our historic rate is an average of around 9,000 hectares per year over the last sort of 4 years. So I think I can conclude there by saying that there's a clear and present need for the UK as a whole and their businesses of all shapes and sizes to consider UK woodland creation, both for carbon mitigation, but also for the wider action of contributing to social benefit and shaping our landscape for the future for all stakeholders. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Steve. And a great showcase there of the co-benefits of forestry and then the importance of the sustainable timber industry and employment. The concept of leaching into other countries is a really important point. So thank you. Just before we move on, I just want to mention that a copy of the recording of this webinar will be made available after. We've had some questions come in, so those that we don't get to, you have a follow-up there as well. So thanks very much. Next slide, please, and next presenter. So we're moving now to our friends and colleagues in the Netherlands, and Casper is an advisor at Staatsbosbeheer here. So Casper leads on the advisory on forest management in the western part of the Netherlands for the State Forest Service. He advises local teams in forestry issues such as setting up management plans and dealing with the effects of climate change and Dieback disease. He is also part of the team that determines the national forest policy for the state's forest. And Casper's favourite tree is a Douglas fir. So that's a nice segue, Casper, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, my Douglas fir is my favorite tree because it has such a fantastic bark, and also it can be a majestic tree. Obviously, it's a non-indigenous species to the Netherlands, but even so, very important in our forests. Staatsbosbeheer, or the State Forest Service, was founded 120 years ago to reforest the Netherlands. We are an autonomous government body, and we generate well over 50% of our income. Somewhat 45% of our budget comes from subsidies. We manage to about 273,000 hectares of nature areas, of which 35% are forests. This is somewhat 26% of the total Dutch forest. In 1/3 of these forests, we entirely focus on conservation goals, and in 2/3, we combine ecological goals with recreation and wood production as functions, and of course, carbon storage. All forests owned by Staatsbosbeheer are FSC certified. Next slide, please. So in the Netherlands, which is it's clear that we have very little forest compared to other countries. But we've had a much lower rate, 2% in around 1800, and we are currently at around 11%. We are the least forested country in Europe. As you can see on the right in this picture, we have less than 25 square meter forest per person living in the country. Also, fortunately, we have many monocultures as a result of our forest history. Lots of forests are currently under pressure, heavily under pressure of diseases, climate change, and still a too high deposition of nitrogen. So therefore, we see problems in vitality growth of many species, such as Norway spruce and larch next to the ash tree, which I will touch on in the next slide. Recently, the government signed a climate agreement, in which the Dutch government, in which the intention is to increase forest area and also to improve forest structure in order to increase the resilience of our forests and make them less vulnerable to negative external impacts. Next slide, please. So ash dieback disease is one of the major problems in European forests, as was said before. It is caused by a fungus which originates in Eastern Asia, where it lives in symbiosis with a different type of ash tree. It wasn't unintentionally brought to Poland, and from there it spread all over Europe. In the Netherlands, we first noticed it in 2009, and a couple of years later had spread over the entire country. The fungus causes the leaves to wither and young shoots to die back. This is a yearly process which weakens the trees year by year. They become very vulnerable to all sorts of secondary infections, for example, other fungi. And next slide, please. This causes widespread mortality, as you can see on these pictures here. This is really a disaster for the Dutch forests. Many of these, many of these forests have been planted in let's say the reclaimed land on clay soil, and we have very little natural regeneration in these forests, also unfortunately. So both economically, as it is highly valued timber, and ecologically, as many insects and fungi are bound to the ash tree, it is quite a heavy impact. There is no cure to the disease, but there is a small percentage of ash trees which appear to be able to resist the disease. And research is currently carried out in many European countries in order to preserve the ash tree for the European forests. Hopefully we can start replanting ash trees soon from these programs, but in the Netherlands this program is not really successful as yet, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So while ash dieback is a major catastrophe, we now try to make the best of it and take this as an opportunity to improve forest structure. All replanting is done with a mixture of multiple tree and shrub species, mainly indigenous species, but we also add a percentage of foreign species in the multifunctional forests to have more spread the risk, let's say, over more species. We try to make also gradual forest edges with shrubs and lower vegetation, which you can see on the bottom left. In the past, many forests in the Netherlands were planted right up to the agricultural land with trees, and have a hard line between forest and agricultural land, and we try to improve this by making a gradual forest. In forestry, we more and more focused on small-scale measurements. Hereby, we aim to enhance biodiversity and ensure long-term carbon sequestration with all these measures. And what I want to emphasize is also to us very important to keep wood production as a goal in these multifunctional forests, and to have this product, the wood product, it is important for us. Carbon is sequestrated for a long time if you have these products in, for example, buildings, and on the new trees can grow on the place where you take out the trees that you can use in construction and other types of good ways to use the wood. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. So Staatsbosbeheer has a major challenge in replanting those 5,000 hectares of ash forest. In addition, we might have to replant also thousands of hectares in other types of forest or with dominated by other trees, as we see, as I said before, fertility problems and mortality in, for example, Norway spruce, larch, and beech. Also, our organization, suppose we set a goal to realize the planting of 5,000 hectares of additional forest in our own terrains. And the government in the Netherlands, unfortunately, hardly provides any funding for reforestation and afforestation. This also, of course, applies to other landowners and nature management organizations. And corporate funding is therefore essential to Staatsbosbeheer and other organizations in the Netherlands. And we sincerely hope that we can continue our cooperation with Natural Capital Partners and Microsoft, which has, as was mentioned before, invested in a project. And you can see in the picture in the middle is where we are planting with people from Microsoft Netherlands and Natural Capital Partners in this project. So thank you for your attention.
Fantastic, thank you, Casper, and just great to see there's a bit of machinery to help the tree planting there. I know that would be welcome in a lot of locations. I like the showcase there of the impacts of both climate change and then globalization, which is the ash dieback. So interesting features for everyone to think about. So we move now on to our next presentation. I'd like to introduce Holly Bill. As I mentioned, leads environmental sustainability for Microsoft in the data center community and development team. Holly is building a program to positively impact the long-term environmental health of the communities in Microsoft's global data center footprint through community engagement and employee activation, and is focusing on constructive strategic contributions to the holistic health of these diverse international communities. And her favorite tree is a magnolia. So over to you, Holly, and tell us why.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Yeah, my favorite tree is a magnolia, probably because as I was growing up, that was the first tree that I would climb in my neighborhood, and just spending time up in that tree was kind of formative for me growing up. So it's still my favorite. You can go to the next slide. And thank you for the introduction on a little bit of what how Microsoft has contributed, but I'd love to talk about some more about what Microsoft has done to contribute in these countries and why. So we are a global company. We have operations all over the world. And you've probably heard our mission to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. But we also know that we live in a resource-constrained world, and also that we are one company, so we can't only focus internally on our own operations. Even if our resource consumption went to zero, that's not close to enough to close the gap necessary to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And we realized the increasing role of corporates in contributing to the commitments that countries have made to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And there's also very real business benefits to these contributions. And next slide. Microsoft has operated 100% carbon neutrally since 2012, and this program predates my time in role. I've been building the data center community program since 2018, but since 2012, how it has worked is that Microsoft Corporate Environmental Sustainability Team measures our company's emissions, and that includes our direct emissions, our electricity-related emissions, and our business air travel. And then we first, of course, focus, our first priority is to reduce the emissions, reduce what we emit. Then we purchase renewable energy to replace the fossil fuel use that we need to power our operations. But then lastly, we try to, the goal of the program is to remove carbon from the atmosphere or avoid being emitted in the first place through the procurement of these carbon offsets. And so every business unit within Microsoft pays for their share of the carbon emissions, and that creates the fund that we use for these projects. And we have white papers online that we want to share this practice that we do and have any other company be able to become carbon neutral as well. So we try to provide as much information as we can online to follow that too. But for the projects that we choose, we know that natural climate solutions like conservation and restoration and improved land management in our global forests and wetlands and grasslands and agriculture lands a very important and cost-effective role in carbon mitigation. And we know that there's a gap in the investments in these solutions. So we need more investments in our forests and wetlands and sensitive areas. So that's where I come in, is that we can prioritize, that we have a team that leads these carbon investments, but we can prioritize the locations for these projects, and on where I focus on our communities where we have data centers, as well as we can use dedicated funds from my team in the Cloud Operations and Innovation Group. So next slide is more about the program that I lead, which is dedicated to the long-term environmental health of the communities where we have data centers. So this is rooted in our company's environmental commitment, and then that leads into our data center sustainability strategy. So we have a team that looks at sustainability within the four walls of our data centers, but also extends beyond that and beyond our own operations into our communities. These communities are diverse. They have widely differing priorities when it comes to sustainability. So we need to work closely with those in the community, the civic leaders, the schools, community groups, nonprofits, and our employees as part of their communities to understand where we can make the most impact. And we do this because it's the right thing to do, but also we realize that establishing ourselves as a trusted member of these real communities is important, and that our growth is predicated on that trust, that we will be a good neighbor and a positive member of that area where we operate. So where are our data centers? If you go to the next slide, you can see our services are across the world in 54 regions. And if you forgot where Europe is and you're too embarrassed to say, Tom, if you click, you'll see a great red circle that shows you that we have a strong established presence in Europe and in Ireland and the Netherlands. So next slide, Reforesting York. As one of our projects in Europe, we focused on 155 hectares in Ireland and in the Netherlands. And our approach differed as was appropriate for the country, but we wanted to target woodlands to have the greatest impact on watershed restoration and biodiversity conservation. So natural capital partners had those trusted capabilities to source the sites and establish and maintain the forest for the projects. So in Ireland, we were planting 137 hectares of land, and we partnered with the farmers to provide the financing to the landowners who were committing to new native forest creation on their lands. So we were supplementing the payments that they received from the Irish Forestry Service. And the sequestration there in Ireland, it was equated to removing about 7,500 passenger vehicles from the road for a year. And in the Netherlands, we partnered with Staatsbosbeheer, who you just heard from, thanks Casper, for 10 hectares with a mix of 12 native species, including riparian planting, to protect the waterways and homes to beaver families as a keystone species in the area. And another great aspect to this project is the opportunity for employee engagement. You can see in the map that the woodlands is super close to where we have our data center, which is important to us for locality. And if you go to my final slide, is a nice picture where we got to get out and work alongside Staatsbosbeheer to plant many of the trees. I think we planted 750 trees that day. And this, as I mentioned, is right near our data center. This is actually the forest where our employees get out and walk their dogs and their families through these forests. And employees are definitely part of the communities where we operate. We also have a sub office nearby, and we actually had two people from, two who work in the field, and then we are happy to also invite other businesses in the area who want to come out and help with these restoration projects as well. So this was one example of projects that we're doing around the world, and we're excited for more projects in these countries. Thanks.
Great stuff, Holly, and that's a fab photo as well. And great to see this, the broader vision here. You know, it's beyond reduction, it's beyond neutral. It's a good benchmark for a leader. And there's a theme on all those presentations about repairing locations, the impact within watersheds. So great that it was picked out within a corporate program as well. So thanks, Holly. Next presentation now, if we can, I'd like to introduce Kim, who's the head of sustainability at Thomas Cook Northern Europe. So Kim has worked in Thomas Cook for almost 30 years, started off a career on cruise ships through airline crew management, service, HR, and ground handling, everything in between as well. So he truly knows what it takes to run a business like Thomas Cook. Kim now heads the sustainability function within Northern Europe and is challenging the status quo on climate, enabling Thomas Cook to take a bold leadership position in the region and beyond. And Kim's favorite tree, so he's a little bit biased here, Kim, is the Danish oak.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Yes, the oak tree is my favorite tree for that reason. It's a central part of our history, and it's all the way back to the Vikings. They used it to build boats to conquer the world until today's Scandinavian furniture production. So obviously a very central part of our history. Yes. So, but thank you again. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today about why we offset emissions from our activities, why we have chosen that, and why we engage ourselves in reforestation projects. I'll jump right into my presentation with a very short introduction to who we are and what we do at Thomas Cook. I'll also speak a bit about how we organize our approach to sustainability. Then a few words about how we deal with the continuous environmental pressure we see on the global travel industry, a topic that seems to be growing every day. Especially our Nordic market is under severe pressure. We see phenomena like travel anxiety and fly shame spreading across the whole region, even into other areas of the world. So we believe offsetting is a very useful tool to deal with these changes under the current conditions we work under. So at least for an intermediate period. I'll also speak a bit about our offsetting program and the benefits and our cooperation with natural capital partners. So I'll go into more details about the engagements and the forest creation projects as well. So next slide, please. So Thomas Cook is one of the oldest travel companies in the world. It was established more than 175 years ago. The group operates a number of very strong tour operator brands throughout Europe and the UK. The core product is traditional charter holiday packages done by air. So, and I would say that approximately 80% of our business is in Europe. So this is a region that is very important to us. So the products are mainly traditional sun and beach holidays to destination located at around the Mediterranean. The Canary Island is another big destination, and we do some long haul flights as well. The group operates its own hotel division, currently with more than 200 hotels in the portfolio. So, and then finally, and probably most important, the business is supported by more than 21,000 colleagues around the group, and they make sure we have happy customers and manage to deliver the best weeks of the year. So next slide, please. So the company has been working very seriously with the sustainability topics for many years, and it's in a way considered to be a pioneer. So we have a very clear vision and a strategy in place. We have a common understanding in the company and a senior management commitment that efforts to reduce the impacts are necessary for our long-term survival. And the considerable investment we have done with the offsetting program with NCP is in a way an evidence of that dedication. The foundation of our sustainability strategy is to improve our impact on 3 core areas, as you can see below. Our airline operations are obviously a key part of our business. We cannot currently deliver the products we have without this part. So, however, it's unfortunately also the single most polluting part of our activities, with an estimated share of close to 90% of all emissions. So we have a long-term vision also, and that is to achieve carbon neutrality for all our activities and products, and beyond that, perhaps even explore opportunities to deliver a positive climate contribution if that's possible. So next slide, please. So even though our airlines have some of the lowest carbon emission figures per passenger kilometers, we experience the same pressure as everyone else in the industry, a pressure for optimization and fast results. So we need to have our full focus on the importance of both knowledge and more strategic thinking and some wise investments going forward. We see a lot of extensive media attention in all our markets, and even governments imposing regulation and extensive tax systems on air travel. So definitely important to adapt to that. And we even see influences like Greta Thunberg, a phenomena that is spreading also across the globe. So we are completely aware that we need to customize our travel products to meet the future sustainability requirements in order to survive. And this is one of the main reasons why we have engaged with carbon offsetting, actually. Next slide, please. So we are probably, I would say, one of the first global travel companies to work very detailed with climate offsetting. We cover all flights products we deliver and all greenhouse gases we choose to pay all offsets ourselves and not pass that cost on to the customers that others are doing in the business. So, and yesterday we actually announced yet another important milestone in our program. We will now cover all emissions from our customers staying at any of our brand hotels, and for all customers using our bus transfers to and from the airport. So that will be included now. So if we look at the project engagement, I think we have managed together with NCP to put together a strong portfolio for our first year. And we work in 4 different pillars. The global impact offset, these represents, sorry about that, destination catalyst. So we wanted to make sure that there is a very strong connection to our world and products. So we don't have any carbon offsets generated directly here, but the projects connects very well with our ambitions to contribute at a more ethical level. And then secondly, the global impact offset, these represent water infrastructure projects in East Africa and in the Gambia, high impact community-based carbon offset projects that provides better living conditions for thousands of people. And finally, we have the destination and low cost offset that are renewable energy projects in different areas of the world like Turkey and India, also in a way related to our product. Those are low cost offsets, but highly effective on emissions. So all our projects are credible and approved in accordance with the carbon neutral protocol, and which is an important part of our communication strategy. So, and working with a trusted provider is obviously a key element in to achieve success also. So a natural capital partner was the best choice for us in our market survey with more than 7 different providers compared. So a very solid partnership we have. So looking on the longer term, it's our ambition to maintain the position as one of the leading traveling businesses on climate offsetting, but we will continue to strive towards carbon neutrality from our activities as an ultimate objective, definitely. Next slide, please. So finally, looking at the specific project, because as said, reforestation is definitely something we want to engage ourselves in, and we are committed to do something about. So as everybody knows, the ability of trees to absorb CO2 in the atmosphere is obviously one of the most important tools for solving the climate problem. And that is one of the reasons why we as a company have decided to include forestation as a central part of our offsetting engagement. And we have chosen a project in Spain as our primary focus. It's on the mainland in the region of Castilla y León. We've done that for several reasons. First of all, degraded land is a significant challenge here, and it's a growing problem. 2, it's also one of our most important destinations with millions of our customers traveling to every year. So the project clearly delivers a number of obvious benefits for the environment, but also some that are valuable for us as a business. As said, Spain is one of our most important markets, and the planting trees project fits very well with our sustainability strategy. It also supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is another part of our commitment. We see that the engagement will provide us with improved reputation and image value. That's pretty obvious. It also delivers a solid platform for our communication around the whole program and with our sustainability ambitions in the group. And it can also help engage key stakeholders. So part of the project is to first of all, dedicate one of these trees that we are 10,000 trees that we are planting in step 1 to each employee of the group, just to emphasize the commitment and the importance of reforestation. And another part of that process is also to invite stakeholders down for tree planting events on location to make our climate actions more tangible in a way. So next slide, please. So just again to emphasize that climate neutral travel is definitely part of the future, that it's most likely unavoidable, and we want to be part of the future of that future. We will continue to strive at becoming a company with no impact on the environment. So we see it as an absolute necessity for survival that we manage to adapt to these changing conditions. So forestation is also a very effective way to combat the problems we are facing, and the reason for us to continue to invest and engage in these type of projects going forward. So that's it for me. So thank you very much for your attention.
Fabulous. Thanks, Kim. And you know, it's I think you've emphasized that it's critical for people to take away from this that Thomas Cook is doing a lot internally to drive emissions down through technology and industry engagement and innovation. And then instead of doing nothing or passing the responsibility on to customers, you're taking that responsibility for your climate impacts and reducing it to neutral. And then on top of that, you're additionally doing this Spanish project. So it's fabulous to see all that in a nutshell, Kim. Thank you very much. So that's it. So we're at the end of our 4 presentations. It's almost time to begin the Q&A, but first I'd like to run our final audience poll. So if you can, please, here we go. So what extent are you inclined to support natural climate solutions like European forests? So strongly inclined, somewhat inclined, or not at all inclined. So just give you a little bit of time to respond to that. Perfect. That's 2 questions. There we go. So so if we were to compare that to the earlier result where we had 46% of the audience were including natural climate solutions within that, we now have 85% of the audience strongly inclined to support European forests, 15% somewhat inclined. So that's a 100% conversion rate if we add those up together. So kudos to the panelists for providing that. So we have a few minutes left remaining for our Q&A. So we have had a lot of presentations, so a lot of questions that have come through in that time. I have to be selective because we're running short here. So I was going to pose the first question, if I can, to Holly, just at Microsoft. I really want to pick up on a theme here, just if I can. So why does Microsoft actually focus on forestry as opposed to the other aspects of sustainability in your program?
Yeah, so we actually don't only focus on forestry, but we look at what's most relevant to our communities and what will have the greatest impact there. So all of our communities around the world are varied, and so we work with the community to see what is the most relevant type of sustainability projects there. So it could be water, it could be waste, it could be carbon projects, it could be forestry projects. I personally am inclined for these natural climate solutions because they not just avoid emissions, but they actually are taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and they're cost effective, and we have the employee engagement opportunities and all the social and economic impacts of forestry as well, where we try to, as much as we can, have not the projects not just an environmental benefit, but those social and economic benefits as well. So forestry is that's a great choice for us for many of our communities.
Perfect. Makes sense. Thanks. Thank you for that, Holly. A question then for Steve, if I can. So this is a question that comes up often in our discussions around client programs and sequestration rates. So what about the time it takes for trees to grow? Don't we need the carbon emission savings today? What's your view on that, Steve?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I would say that if sort of woodland creation was the only action you were taking, then you would be more worried about that. But obviously, this has to go hand in hand with programs of in-house emissions reductions and that kind of thing. The second thing, as we've seen, is that a lot of the co-benefits of woodlands begin to accrue immediately. The third thing I would say is that the UK climate change risk assessment sort of projects that the next 30 years or so of climate change are kind of locked in. So what happens after year 30 is still up for grabs, which is when woodlands are hitting their stride as far as carbon capture goes. And I suppose my final answer to that is something I kind of think about sometimes, is that I think we probably, knowing what we know now, we wish people had planted more trees 30 years ago. And we are the people now that get to plant those trees that people won't have to ask the same question of us in 30 years. So I think that's how I would answer that.
Perfect. I am going to pick on you again, Steve, just for another question, because I think it's relevant to the audience that it cropped up. So it's around commercial timber and the role in projects, and what happens to the carbon, and also the view of that within projects. And what's your experience?
Sure. Well, the carbon itself, generally speaking, is going to stay locked up, because most of that will end up in harvested wood products, which might be timber in the construction industry, fence posts, all sorts of things. So the carbon remains stored anyway, and then you get future rotations on the same piece of ground. You get a kind of a long-term, never-ending cycle of planting new forests, capturing more carbon, storing it, and planting more trees. So it's great, sort of, as far as carbon capture goes, it's extremely efficient. You don't sort of tend to see nowadays the sort of modern forestry is not about planting entire hills of rows of monoculture. There's a lot more mixing of species and mixing in of broadleafs into the conifers and that sort of thing. So you get a much better designed woodland. As far as business is concerned, we've got some businesses, Kia is a good example. They're a construction business, so for them, buying carbon credits from a sustainable timber project, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's great. I think that question will come up quite a lot, so it's good to have your insight into that. The question for Casper, actually, and this isn't a question that was raised earlier on, but it was the Snap for here and your operations outside of the Netherlands. Do you support forestry projects and activities in other countries using your expertise?
Staatsbosbeheer is only active in managing forests in the Netherlands, but we do have a lot of connections with, especially with our neighbors from Belgium, in ways to improve our forestry, our forest management, and also we look quite a lot to Germany, because Germany, of course, has a much longer history of sustainable forest management, actually. So we do look to partnerships with other countries, but we don't have any activities ourselves within those countries in terms of management or planting.
Perfect. Thanks, Casper. And then final question for Kim, if I can. Just thinking about the expansion of the Nordic program, is that going to be moved into other parts of the global business, because you are a bigger brand than just Northern Europe?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we plan both to expand the current Nordic program. So, as I said earlier, we want to have a complete compensation of the whole travel package. That's our aim with the offsetting program. But for the rest of the group, we are actually looking into opportunities as well. We look at offsetting all the emissions from all of the airlines activities in the group, which is a very large emission volume. So we are pretty far with that one. Other parts of the business with local tour operator businesses in different European countries are also looking very positive towards offsetting opportunities.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Kim, for that as well. And then maybe just one final question to close up, if I can, just kind of pick up on this, and it's another one for Holly, I'm afraid, because I think this is you touched on this a lot, which was about your influence beyond just your company's footprint. So how does Microsoft actually try to influence the industry, your segment, which is obviously growing year on year?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a bit, but we definitely try to not just focus on our own operations, but see where our technology or where our experience can help in change the industry, and whether that's in water or waste conservation, we try to share all that we have done and our experience in a replicable way. Whether that's through white papers or sharing best practices, case studies. We also try to share Microsoft technology where we can. I would love to get more into it if I ever had more time, but we have an AI for Earth program that puts AI technology into the hands of those around the world trying to solve these climate issues. So yeah, we definitely try to go beyond our own operations. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Great to see that future interface with forestry as well. So look, so with that, we've come to the end of the webinar. On the nose here on the hour. So I'd like to thank you all once again for attending, for asking questions. There's a lot more that actually came through as well. And to thank the speakers for their presentations and their candid responses to the questions as well. So if you have any further questions for any of our presenters, for ourselves, the email addresses are on the screen now. You can also reach out to us direct at Natural Capital Partners. The webinar recording will be available on our website and will be sent out to everybody shortly. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues and anybody else in your network. So thank you very much and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.